Welcome back to the EMF and 5G Fix. My name is Dr. Don Paris, and I'm the author of Regaining Wholeness Through the Subtle Dimensions, which has really become the Bible for scalar energy research through radionics. Now, if you haven't seen all the different videos, go back and review them because we have lots of tips and tricks on how you can reduce your EMF exposure. Now, in my last video, I'd talked about seeing if I could get Dr. Chio to come back from the future and show us how to use some of the different testing devices that we have in our time zone. So let's hear from Dr. Chio and see what we can do with different types of testing devices. So let's look at what happens with different combinations with wired keyboards, unwired mice, and wired mice, and battery versus plugged in. We're going to look at these different types of combinations. Now, this is a typical setup here. So we've got a laptop computer, we've got a detached keyboard, and we've got a remote mouse. So first of all, let's start using something. So you notice every time I move the mouse, we get more noise here. So let's say we start some internet, and we're getting about 2 volts per meter, sometimes peaking up to 3, averaging about 1 to 2, between 1 and 2. The first thing I want to do is see what happens with the wireless keyboard. Let's say we want to go to, oh, you hear that noise over there? You see that? Let's say I wanted to go to Google was your favorite search engine, if I remember right. Okay, so every time I move the mouse, we're getting more peaks here. And every time I want to type something in, let's look for EMF research. This would be a good thing to check out in your time zone. EMF research. So you notice every time I type on the keyboard, we get more spikes and more noise here, just like the mouse. That's because this is communicating with Bluetooth. It's radio frequencies. So let's have a look and see what happens if we use a wired keyboard and a wired mouse. Okay, so now we have the wired mouse. We've got a wire on it, and we've got a wired keyboard. Now, in your time zone, this is probably the best option. In the future, we figured this out, and we use all scalar electromagnetics to transfer information and signals, which are completely harmless. But in this time zone, wires are probably your best bet. So you notice when I move the mouse around now, I don't get any more spikes on the acoustometer. So we're going to just type this in again, EMF research. So you saw a little spike here, and every time you go and move around on the internet, then the Wi-Fi is connecting. So let's see what happens if we disconnect the Wi-Fi. I'm going to turn it off, and we'll use a wired connection. So we've got an Ethernet. Now, a lot of computers nowadays don't have a place for wired connections, so you'll have to get an adapter. You put the adapter in, and then you can plug it into a USB port. So now we're getting our internet back on, and let's go look for electromagnetic fields and cancer, National Cancer Institute. We can close this down, and they give a bit of information about what are electric and magnetic fields, what are the common sources of non-ionizing EMFs. This looks like it might be a good page. I haven't read through it, but there are definite problems with EMFs and non-ionizing radiation and cancer. Now, normally the worst problem for cancer, if you look into the research, especially around leukemia, they found that it had to do with the magnetic field, not necessarily the electric field. And we'll talk about that when we get to the electric and magnetic meter over here. Okay, so you see I can move around, I go to the internet, and we've got a stable amount of watts per meter squared And it's pretty low. It's down here in the 10 to 25. It's not too bad, but it's right next to the computer, so there'll always be a little bit. So let's have a look at the electric meter. Now we're running between 400 and 500 in volts per meter. That's because the laptop is plugged into the wall. So let's see if it goes down when we disconnect and just run on battery. And that dropped it down quite a bit. Now we're down in the high 200s. 292. That's much better. So now I'm going to switch from electric over to magnetic, and we'll see how the magnetism is doing. And we might need to go to a little more sensitive scale. So we're running about 9 to 10 nanoteslas, and I'm going to see what happens when we unplug the power adapter, and we'll see if it goes down. Didn't really change too much. It's pretty much the same. So I'll plug it back in. So we've got power to it, and it's pretty much staying the same. So it maybe went down 1 point or so, but it's just fluctuating. It's pretty solid in that range. So these are some of the things you can do. Have a wired mouse, wired keyboard, connect to an Ethernet via cable, and that'll help reduce your EMF exposure. Now, one good thing I did see here, they have a Qi Organizer room balancer, which is great, and it has the hologram card. This one has reduced stress, and this puts out bio-friendly frequencies, which will also help the body to deal with all these electromagnetic frequencies better. It's a scalar generator like we have in the future. So I really am happy to see this. This is really awesome. Of all the places on earth that you spend the most of your time, it's in the bedroom, usually in the bed. So we're going to test the bed and see what the electro and the magnetic and the high frequencies are. So this is a typical bedroom, and we're going to see what the EMF is in here. So as you can probably hear, there's not very much EMF going on here in terms of RF. That's Wi-Fi, cell phones, things like that. It's really down here in the green, almost at the bottom. When I hold it, it picks it up a little bit more, but when you lay it on the bed, it's pretty darn low. Now, with the electric spectrum, I'm showing 3.5 when I'm holding it, but when I let go of it, it drops down to about 1.5, between 2 and 1.5. Now that's floating. Now remember, there are 4 different ways you can measure the electric. We've got the floating, we've got the grounded, we've got the body voltage, and we've got a 3D, which is pretty expensive and hard to get. But at least we can test both the floating and the grounding. So I'm going to plug the ground in now, and we'll see what we get at that point. Now we do have some electric lights on both sides and on the top. So I'm going to go ahead and turn those off, and then we'll check and see what happens to that meter again. So on the floating, that dropped it down to about 1.4, 1.5. And then we'll see with the grounding. And the grounding actually brings it up to 12. So that means there's some signal running through the ground outside. That shouldn't affect us in the bedroom while we're sleeping, but there is a potential running through the ground outside. Next, we want to look at ionizing radiation, which is like nuclear radiation. It's different from EMF radiation or non-ionizing radiation. So in this room, it's about 27, 28, and that is a very good reading. So it's quite low here. But that's something good to check out as well, because especially like in a basement, there might be radon gas coming up, which has radioactive material coming out. So now I want to talk about something very important called dirty electricity. Now, dirty electricity is the noise that's on your electrical line. Normally you have a sine wave that goes up and down, and it's very clean in terms of hills and valleys. But what's been happening is that with different devices, it adds noise like jagged edges onto your electrical line. There are different ways of testing it. There's a meter that you can plug into the outlet, and it'll test to see how much dirty electricity is on there. But that only tests the hot wire. And some of these new filters that are coming out, like the Stetson filter and the Greenwave filter, those filters are basically like a capacitor that moves that noise over onto the neutral line, so it's not actually gone. But when you plug the meter into the outlet, it shows 0 dirty electricity because it has moved all that noise over to another line. So this noise is normally on the hot line of your electrical line. So the best way to actually test is to use an old-fashioned transistor AM radio. So let's have a look with an AM radio. We'll do a little test and see if we find any dirty electricity. So I turn on the AM radio. So the bedroom seems to be pretty clear, and that's what you want to have. It's pretty low on all levels. Now we're going to check for dirty electricity, and it should sound pretty much like this. This is pretty good. It's pretty soft. Oh, there's a little bit of something going on. Well, let's go see if we can find that. There's something still going on. Well, we'll have a walk outside and see if it gets better. Well, it's getting worse. I think I'm on the right track here. Oh boy. There's something going on. Let's go see if we can find it. Oh yes. What is it? Oh, this could be it. Electric powered motorbikes being charged. Alright, let's see if we can unplug that and see what happens. Oh, that got better. Okay. Much better. Electric power bikes are great, but those chargers can make a lot of dirty electricity. Thank you very much, Dr. Chio. That was really helpful and very fascinating. Now, I remember you once telling me about an experience you had when you went into the far distant past, into Atlantis. Can you share a little bit more about that with us?
This is Dr. Chio, and I am now in the middle of what used to be called Atlantis. I know you've heard a lot of theories and there's myths about Atlantis, but I can tell you as a time traveler, I was there. I visited Atlantis, and it was very well preserved after the volcano explosion. Plato wrote about it as Atlantis in his novels and his fictional works, but this is the actual site where Atlantis existed. It was a very high-level civilization for its time. They had flushing toilets back, we're talking 1500 BC, and even further back, maybe 3000 BC. Now, I can tell you, as a time traveler, some people have speculations as to where Atlantis was, but since I've been able to go back and forth in time, then I can tell you this is exactly where Atlantis was situated. Now, Edgar Cayce had a lot of premonitions and prophecies. He talked about very high levels of technology in Atlantis, and that their own technology level led them to their destruction. But I can tell you it was a natural disaster. It was covered with about 60 to 80 feet of volcanic ash, and that put an end to this civilization. But we do want to pay attention to what's going on in our own electromagnetic field. And so that's why I wear the Qi Organizer, which is a small frequency generator that puts out bio-friendly frequencies about 30,000 times per day. So we've got the little scalar antenna there and frequency generator that will emit these bio-friendly frequencies over and over throughout your day. And if you want to keep it on by your bedside at night, that's what I would recommend while you're sleeping. And in your time zone, I think it's really important to pay attention to not overexpose yourself to electromagnetic frequencies such as 5G, 4G, 3G, 2G, handphones, and e-meters, the new smart meters. So these are the remnants from Atlantis that they were able to save. And they're now in the museum in Santorini, which is the island where Atlantis was. As you can see, they had a high level of art, as well as high levels of technology to make this art. They were highly aesthetic. As you can see from the frescoes from the walls that they were able to save after the destruction from the volcano. They were also friends of the dolphins, our interdimensional travelers friends, who can also time travel. I see them quite often when I'm skipping between the different levels of reality. So basically, this is all that's left from Atlantis.
Dr. Chio, what's it like to fly in an airplane? Did you ever do any testing on an airplane?
So I came back to check out some of your transportation things. I'm in an antique flying machine called a 747, and I just wanted to check out the readings here, and I'll show you what we've got. So we've got about 53 on the RF meter and 33 on the magnetic, but as I walk through, sometimes you get these voltage spikes. So I would suggest if you're going to be flying, that you should get one of these.
Whoa, that's pretty interesting. Well, what about like on an electric train? Are there a lot of EMFs on an electric train?
So I've got this alarm signal going off here with very high RF. I'm in one of these train things, you know, where you go down a track. And in the future, we know that this was a real issue, so we came up with things like the Qi Organizer. This is definitely a futuristic piece that now we're making available in your time zone. So you might want to check them out, qiorganizer.com, so that you can wear them and get some protection from this stuff.
That was a fascinating story. Thank you so much. And I'd also like to thank our viewers for tuning in throughout all these different videos. Now, if you haven't seen all the different videos, go back and review them because we have lots of tips and tricks on how you can reduce your EMF exposure. Also, I'd like to thank you for sharing this with so many people. We've had a good increase in our views, and I really, really do appreciate it. So thank you once again for staying with me throughout this entire series.